Hi, my name is Melanie Army. I'm the Supervising Planner for the State of Rhode Island Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant that we received from HUD. Our grant is called the Sustainable Rhode Island Regional Plan for Sustainable Development. Next slide. HUD Sustainable Communities is a federal partnership between HUD, EPA, and USDOT. It was created in 2009 as a federal effort at silo busting to get people from these organizations, from these agencies in the room together and realize that for similar projects they had completely different types of requirements. And these projects are supposed to support environmental and economic sustainability. Next. Each project has to address these 6 livability principles: provide more transportation choices, equitable and affordable housing, enhance economic competitiveness, supporting existing communities, coordinating and leveraging federal investment and policies, and valuing your communities and your neighborhoods. So the partnership awarded Rhode Island a $1.9 million grant in the fall of 2011. This was a nationally competitive process. We had applied in 2010 and were not funded but had received what was called preferred sustainability status, which meant that we had priority for reapplying, for tweaking our application and reapplying. So the outcome of this grant will be a regional plan for sustainable development. What does that mean? It means that we will take our existing state guide plan elements of Land Use 2025, Transportation 2030, and our newly approved Water 2030. We'll create a new housing plan for the state and a new economic development plan, along with a growth center strategy, and that will become our regional plan for sustainable development. So this is all going to take the preferred scenario of Land Use 2025 of growth centers, development within the urban services boundary, preserving what's important and unique to Rhode Island, and growing where it's appropriate and where we have adequate infrastructure. Rhode Island statewide planning is the fiscal agent for the grant. We have a consortium of 19 members. We have a couple in the room: City of Pawtucket, Town of Burrillville. We have 9 municipalities, 6 or 7 state agencies, and 3 nonprofits. Grow Smart Rhode Island Legal Services, and Rhode Island LISC are also on the consortium. Next slide. So, state housing plan. This housing plan is going to consolidate 2 existing expired state housing plans: the state housing plan and the state affordable housing production plan, which expired in 2011. This will be looking at the need for affordable housing in Rhode Island and the need for market rate housing. This is not going to be just an affordable housing production plan. This is going to be, these are the housing needs in Rhode Island. How do we address all of them, from your lowest of subsidized housing to your highest of market rate, because there's a need for all of it. We will also be creating what's called a regional analysis of impediments to fair housing, and the planners in the room who have dealt with housing, analysis of impediments to fair housing is what are the barriers that prevent people from getting affordable quality housing in your neighborhood, in your community. So we'll be doing a regional analysis of impediments to fair housing with the 6 HUD entitlement communities in the state. And we'll have a section for the state, and we'll have a section for each of those entitlement communities. It's an important opportunity to readdress the state's housing policies and regulations, which, as we all know, can be a contentious but important discussion. We are struggling to get people other than housers to the table, so you'll be getting information over the next few years about public meetings about housing and economic development and growth centers, and it's important to get everyone to the table. If you work on economic development, we want you at the table for housing because they are tied, whether you think they are or not. Next slide. Economic development, a hot topic in Rhode Island. Our current economic development plan is 12 years old and has been expired for 7 years. So the new plan will replace this existing plan, and it will also incorporate the industrial land use plan, so that we'll have one economic development plan for the state, not multiple, so that people have one place to go when they're looking to see if a project is consistent with what the state is looking for. We have received extra funding from the Economic Development Administration to make this economic development plan serve as the state's comprehensive economic development strategy, which is what the state has to look at when someone is applying for EDA money. They have to have the project certified by the state, and so the state will use this opportunity to make this our strategy so that it's one eliminates another layer. So this plan will establish a vision and principles as well as a framework for decisions on future investments. One of the things that's really unique about our grant is that every section is looking at place-based strategies, place-based economic development, growth centers. So we recognize that economic development in Lincoln and North Smithfield in the Blackstone Valley is going to be different than economic development in Newport. And how do we create a framework and a vision flexible enough to serve the whole state while taking into consideration the fact that Blackstone Valley has great mills that can be redeveloped for economic development and incubator space and housing, whereas Newport might have to rely more on tourism. And so it's going to be taking a really close look at how those place-based strategies can really help grow unique economic development opportunities for communities in Rhode Island. Next, growth centers. Our goal is to compile a series of mapping layers including natural and cultural resources, economic development, and infrastructure assets, our existing growth centers designations, and hopefully, actually these maps I think are going to look a lot like the maps that Vera just showed you. And we're going to bring the communities together and say, this is what we've heard from you, is this what you're thinking? Challenges with this work, that even when we have compiled all this information, the communities are going to have some really hard decisions to make in terms of where do they want to focus their growth. This isn't a decision the state is going to make for them and say, this is the spot for your growth center. This is a town decision, a municipal level decision based on the needs of their town, the housing needs, the economic development needs, the infrastructure resources that they have. So this could look very different in Richmond than it would look in Little Compton to Burrville to North Smithfield. So the growth centers, we're going to also, part of this project will have the consultants looking at creating criteria for growth centers, creating sort of a typology for the growth centers. We're anticipating that there will be at least 3 typologies: rural, suburban, or urban. One of the difficult conversations we're going to have with this project is promoting density. Always a difficult conversation, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. How do we talk about and frame this in terms of the advantages of density as opposed to density itself? How do we determine the appropriate scale of growth centers? For example, something in North Smithfield would be of a completely different scale than something in Providence. So creating those frameworks for towns to then take and say, okay, we're going to look at your map, we're going to look at these criteria, we're going to look at our infrastructure, and we think that this is the appropriate place for us to grow. Next, one of the other large parts of the grant is data and performance measures. We will be creating indicators and performance measures that the state can track annually to track our performance over time with implementing this regional plan for sustainable development. How well are we doing on creating housing for everyone? How well are we doing on creating place-based economic development? How well are we doing on creating healthy housing? Those sorts of things. So we're working to bring together the state's data in a shared and accessible format. We're working with other state agencies right now to determine what data each agency has, who controls that data, can it be shared, can we create agreements, can we create a portal so that if someone is looking for state data, they can go to one portal for all of the state agency data and then link to it from there. We had a meeting with another agency, and one of the women was like, all of our data is on our website, but the navigation is so bad that when I need to find something, I just Google it rather than try to find it through the website. She's like, because that'll take me straight to it rather than me having to link through it my own website. So we're trying to work on issues like that. Next. Another large part of the grant is determining technical assistance and capacity building needs with planners and communities. And what we'll be doing is we'll be breaking this out into 2 phases. Over the next year, we'll be doing some technical assistance and capacity building with planners based off of a survey statewide planning did this past summer in terms of what are the skills you want as a planner but that you don't have the capacity or the money in your community to do. What can we provide for you? So we'll be doing that over the next year, 2013. And then in 2014, based off of the outcomes of the planning process of the grant, we'll be doing technical assistance and capacity building that has developed out of the actual planning process. And that'll be for planning and public and planning boards, commissions, and we'll be working with the Grow Smart Land Use Collaborative on that. Next. The real heart of the HUD Sustainable Communities Grant is the integrated implementation matrix. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking the goals, priorities, and strategies of the housing plan, the new economic development plan, growth centers, the three already existing state guide plan elements of Land Use 2025, Transportation 2030, and Water 2030, and really creating a robust implementation matrix almost on a work plan level for the state, saying this is who's responsible for this action, and this is what its priority is, and this is how we're going to fund it. And then we'll be able to use the data and performance measure section to check, to see how we're working towards implementing that over time. So it'll articulate short, medium, and long-term strategies that help move Rhode Island towards a more sustainable development pattern. And it will also assign responsible parties and provide cost estimates where feasible. The last very large part of the grant is our social equity and engagement process. As part of the grant requires that we establish a social equity advisory committee. This committee will establish guiding principles for social equity throughout the planning process. They'll review our existing plans and the newly developed plans to make sure that social equity is infused without. We currently have a nomination process open for interested parties to serve on the Social Equity Advisory Committee. We're looking for Rhode Island residents who have an interest in equity issues, as well as professionals who work in and on social equity and environmental justice issues in Rhode Island. We want a committee that's balanced, representative, and able to tap into existing networks and communities in the state, and we want it to be demographically and geographically diverse. The fact of the matter is that most of the equity work happening in Rhode Island happens in Providence, but we're working really hard to make sure that it is both geographically and demographically diverse, because although most of the agencies are in Providence, there are equity issues in every community in our state. And we want to make sure that we have those representatives who can bring those communities' viewpoints to the table. So we have the nomination form out right now. Nominations are due October 22nd. They'll be reviewed on a rolling basis. And if anybody wants the nomination form, you can get it from me. Next, please. So this is our project schedule. The year one, which is what we're currently in, is community engagement, RFP development. We'll hopefully be putting a monster RFP on the street in October or November. Year 2 will be development of the plans, public participation, capacity building. Year 3 is plan adoption, capacity building, and the start of implementation. Next. And for more information, you can contact me or my staff or Chris Witt. And this is our website. Sorry it's so small because it's very long on our state website. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.